Hey, it's Brett, and we are reading a short story today by Ray Bradbury, Mars is Heaven. The ship came down from space. It came from the stars and the black velocities, and the shining movements and the silent gulfs of space. It was a new ship. It had fire in its body and men in its metal cells, and it moved with a clean silence, fiery and warm. In it were 17 men, including a captain. The crowd at the Ohio field had shouted and waved their hands up into the sunlight, and the rocket had bloomed out into great flowers of heat and color and run away into space on the third voyage to Mars. Now it was decelerating with metal efficiency in the upper Martian atmospheres. It was still a thing of beauty and strength. It had moved the midnight water space like pale sea leviathan. It had passed the ancient moon and thrown itself onward into nothingness, following another. The men within it had been battered, thrown about, sickened, made well again, each in his turn. One man had died, but now the remaining 16, with their eyes clear in their heads and their faces pressed to the thick glass ports, watched Mars swing up under them. "Mars, Mars, good old Mars, here we are," cried Navigator Lustig. "Good old Mars," said Samuel Hingston, archaeologist. "Well," said John Black. The ship landed softly on a lawn of green grass. Outside upon the lawn stood an iron deer. Further up the lawn, a tall brown Victorian house sat in the quiet sunlight, all covered with scrolls and rococo, its windows made of blue and pink and yellow and green colored glass. Upon each porch were the hairy geraniums and an old swing which was hooked into the porch ceiling, which was now swung back and forth in a little breeze. At the top of the house was a cupola with diamond leaded glass windows and a dunce cap roof. Through the front window you could see an ancient piano with yellow keys and a piece of music called Beautiful Ohio sitting on the music rest. Around the rocket in 4 directions spread the little town, green and motionless in the Martian spring. There were white houses and red brick ones, and tall elm trees blowing in the wind, and tall maples and horse chestnuts, and church steeples with golden bells silent in them. The men in the rocket looked out and saw this. Then they looked at one another, and they looked out again. They held on to each other's elbows, suddenly unable to breathe, it seemed. Their faces grew pale, and they blinked constantly, running from glass port to glass port at the ship. "I'll be damned," whispered Lustig, rubbing his face with his numb fingers, his eyes wet. "I'll be damned, damned, damned. It can't be, it just can't be. Lord," there was a call from the chemist. "Sir, the atmosphere is fine for breathing, sir." Black turned slowly. "Are you sure?" "No doubt of it, sir." "Then we'll go out." "Lord, yes," said Samuel Hingston. "Hold on," said Captain John Black. "Just a moment. Nobody gave any orders." "But, sir—" "Sir, nothing. How do we know what this is?" "We know what this is, sir," said the chemist. "It's a small town with good air in it, sir." "And the small town of the Earth Town, and it's a small town the like of Earth Towns," said Hingston, the archaeologist. "Incredible. It can't be, but it is." Captain John Black looked at him idly. "Do you think that the civilizations of 2 planets can progress at the same rate and evolve the same way, Hingston?" "I wouldn't have thought so, sir." Captain Black stood by the port. "Look out there, the geraniums, a specialized plant. The specific variety has only been known on Earth for 50 years. Think of the thousands of years of time it takes to evolve plants. Then tell me if it's logical that the Martians should have 1. Leaded glass windows, 2. Cupolas, 3. Porch swings, 4. An instrument that looks like a piano and probably is a piano. And 5, if you look closely, if a Martian composer would have a piece published by the name of, strangely enough, Beautiful Ohio, all of which means that we have an Ohio River here on Mars. It is quite strange, sir. Strange, hell, it is absolutely impossible, and I suspect the whole bloody shooting setup. Something's wrong here, and I'm not leaving the ship till I know what it is. Oh, sir. Darn it, said Samuel Hingston. I wanted to investigate this at first hand. It may be that there are similar patterns of thought, movement, civilization on every planet in our system. We may be on the threshold of a great psychological and metaphysical discovery in our time, sir. Don't you think? I'm willing to wait a moment, said Captain John Black. It may be, sir, that we are looking upon a phenomenon that, for the first time, would absolutely prove the existence of a God, sir. There are many people who are of good faith without such proof, Mr. Hingston. I'm one myself, sir, but certainly a thing like this, out there, said Hingston, could not occur without divine intervention, sir. It fills me with such terror and elation that I don't know whether to laugh or cry, sir. Do neither, then, until we know what we're up against. Up against, sir? inquired Lustig. I see that we're up against nothing. It's a good, quiet, green town, much like the one I was born in, and I like the looks of it. When were you born, Lustig? In 1910, sir. That makes you 50 years old now, doesn't it? This being 1960, yes, sir. And you, Hingston? 1920, sir, in Illinois, and this looks swell to me, sir. This couldn't be heaven, said the captain ironically, although I must admit it looks peaceful and cool and pretty much like Green Bluff, where I was born in 1915. He looked at the chemist. The air's all right, is it? Yes, sir. Well, then, tell you what we'll do. Lustig, you and Hingston and I will fetch ourselves out to look this town over. The other 14 men will stay aboard ship. If anything untoward happens, lift the ship and get the hell out. Do you understand what I say, Craner? Yes, sir. The hell out will go, sir. Leaving you? A loss of 3 men's better than a whole ship. If something bad happens, get back to Earth and warn the next rocket. That's Lingel's rocket, I think, which will be completed and ready to take off sometime around next Christmas. What he has to meet up with. If there's something hostile about Mars, we could certainly want the next expedition to be well armed. So will we, sir. We've got a regular arsenal with us. Tell the men to stand by the guns, then, as Lustig and Hingston and I go out. Right, sir. Come along, Lustig, Hingston. The 3 men walked out together, down through the levels of the ship. It was a beautiful day. A robin sat on a blossoming apple, and it sang continuously. Showers of petal snow sifted down when the wind touched the apple tree, and the blossom smell drifted upon the air. Somewhere in the town, somebody was playing the piano, and the music came and went, softly, drowsily. The song was Beautiful Dreamer. Somewhere else, a phonograph, scratchy and faded, was hissing out the record of Roman and the Gloamin', sung by Harry Lauder. The 3 men stood outside the ship, the port closed behind them. At every window a face pressed, looking out. The large metal guns pointed this way and that way, ready. Now the phonograph record being played was, "Oh, give me a June night and the moonlight and you." Lustig began to tremble. Samuel Hingston did likewise. Hingston's voice was so feeble and uneven that the captain had to ask him to repeat what he said. I said, sir, That I think I have solved this, all of this, sir. And what's the solution, Hingston? The soft wind blew. The sky was serene and quiet. Somewhere a stream of water ran through the cool caverns and tree shadings of a ravine. Somewhere a horse and wagon trotted and rolled by, bumping. Sir, it has to be. This is the only solution. Rocket travel began to Mars in the years before the First World War, sir. The captain stared at his archaeologist. No. But yes, sir. You must admit, look at all this. How else explain it? The houses, the lawns, the iron deer, the flowers, the pianos, the music. Hingston, oh. And the captain put his hand to his face, shaking his head. His hand shaking now, his lips blue. Sir, listen to me. Hingston took his elbow persuasively and looked up into the captain's face, pleading. Say that they were some people in the year 1905, perhaps, who hated wars and wanted to get away from Earth, and they got together, some scientists, in secret, and built a rocket and came out here to Mars. No, Hingston. Why not? The world was a different place in 1905. They could have kept it a secret much more easily. But the work, Hingston, the work of building a complex thing like a rocket, oh, no. The captain looked at his shoes, looked at his hands, looked at the houses, and then at Hingston. And they came up here, and naturally the houses they built were similar to Earth houses because they brought the cultural agriculture with them. And here it is. And they've lived here all these years, said the captain. It's peace and quiet, sir. Maybe they made a few trips to bring enough people here for one small town and then stopped, for fear of being discovered. That's why the town seems so old-fashioned. I don't see a thing myself that is older than the year 1927, do you? No, frankly I don't, Hingston. There are our people, sir. This is an American city. It is definitely not European. That's right too, Hingston. Or maybe, just maybe, sir, rocket travel is older than we think. Perhaps it started in some part of the world hundreds of years ago, and was discovered and kept secret by a small number of men, and they came to Mars with only occasional visits to Earth over the centuries. You make it sound almost reasonable. It is, sir. It has to be. We have the proof here before us. All we have to do now is find some people and verify it. You're right there, of course. We can't just stand here and talk. Did you bring your gun? Yes, but we won't need it. We'll see about it. Come along. We'll ring that doorbell and see if anyone is home. Their boots were deadened of all sound in the thick green grass. It smelled from a fresh mowing. In spite of himself, Captain John Black felt a great peace come over him. It had been 30 years since he had been in a small town, and the buzzings of spring bees in the air lulled and quieted him, and the fresh look of things was a balm to the soul. Hollow echoes sounded from under the boards as they walked across the porch and stood before the screen door. Inside, they could see a bead curtain hung across the hall entry, a crystal chandelier, and a Maxfield Parrish painting framed upon one wall over a comfortable Morris chair. The house smelled old, and of the attic, and infinitely comfortable. You could hear the tinkle of ice rattling in a lemonade pitcher. In a distant kitchen, because of the heat of the day, someone was preparing a soft lemon drink. Captain John Black rang the bell. Footsteps, dainty and thin, came along the hall, and a kind-faced lady of some 40 years, dressed in the sort of dress you might expect in the year 1909, peered out at them. "Can I help you?" she asked. "Beg your pardon," said Captain Black uncertainly, "but we're looking for, that is, could you help us? He stopped. She looked out at him with dark, wondering eyes. "If you're selling something," she said, "I'm much too busy and I haven't time." And she turned to go. "No, wait!" he cried bewilderedly. "What town is this?" She looked him up and down as if he were crazy. "What do you mean, what town is it? How could you be in a town and not know what town it was?" The captain looked as if he wanted to go under a shady apple tree. "I beg your pardon," he said, "but we're strangers here. We're from Earth, and we want to know how this town got here and you got here." "Are you census takers?" she asked. "No." "What do you want then?" she demanded.
Well,
"Well?"
how long has this town been here?"
"It was built in 1868, she snapped at them. "Is this a game?"
"No, not a game," cried the captain. "Oh, God," he said. "Look here, we're from Earth."
"From where?"
"From Earth."
"Where's that?"
"From Earth,"
he cried. "Out of the ground, you mean?"
"No, from the planet Earth," he almost shouted. "Here," he insisted. "Come out onto the porch and I'll show you."
"No," she said, "I won't come out there, and you are all evidently quite mad from the sun." Lustig and Hingston stood behind the captain. Hingston now spoke up. "Mrs.," he said, "we have come in a flying ship across space among the stars. We have come from the third planet from the sun, Earth, to this planet, which is Mars. Now do you understand, Mrs.?" "Mad from the sun," she said, taking hold of the door. "Go away now, before I call to my husband, who's upstairs taking a nap, and he'll beat you all with his fists." "But," said Hingston, "this is Mars, is it not?" "This," explained the woman as if she were addressing a child, "is Green Lake, Wisconsin, on the continent of America, surrounded by the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans, on a place called the world, or sometimes the earth. Go away now. Goodbye." She slammed the door. The three men stood before the door with their hands up in the air toward it, as if pleading with her to open it once more. They looked at one another.
"Let's knock the door down,"
said Lustig.
"We can't,"
said the captain.
"Why not?" "She didn't do anything bad, did she? We're the strangers here. This is private property. Good God, Hingston."
He went and sat down on the porch step. "What, sir?"
"Did it ever strike you that maybe we got ourselves, somehow, someway, fouled up, and by accident came back and landed on Earth?"
"Oh, sir, oh, sir, oh, sir, oh, sir." And Hingston sat down numbly and thought about it. Lustig stood up in the sunlight.
"How could we have done that?" "I don't know, just let me think,"
Hingston said. "But we checked every mile of the way, and we saw Mars, and our chronometers said so many miles gone, and we went past the moon and out into space, and here we are on Mars. I'm sure we're on Mars, sir." Lustig said,
"But suppose just that by accident in space or time or something we landed in a planet in space in another time. Suppose this Earth is 50 or 60 years ago. Maybe we got lost in the dimensions, don't you think?" "Oh, go away, Lustig."
"And the men in the ship keeping an eye on us, Hingston?"
"And their guns, sir."
Lustig went to the door, rang the bell. When the door opened again, he asked, "What year is this?" "1926, of course," cried the woman furiously, and slammed the door again.
"Did you hear that?"
Lustig ran back to them wildly.
"She said 1926. We have gone back in time. This is Earth."
Lustig sat down, and the three men let the wonder and terror of the thought afflict them. Their hands stirred fitfully on their knees. The wind blew, knotting the locks of hair upon their heads. The captain stood up, brushing off his pants.
"I never thought it would be like this. It scares the hell out of me. How can a thing like this happen?"
"Will anybody in the whole town believe us?" wondered Hingston. Are we playing around with something dangerous? Time, I mean, shouldn't we just take off and go home?
No, we'll try another house.
They walked 3 houses down to a little white cottage under an oak tree.
I like to be as logical as I can get,
Said the captain. He nodded at the town.
How does this sound to you, Hingston? Suppose, as you said originally, that rocket travel occurred years ago, and when the Earth people had lived here a number of years ago, they began to get homesick for Earth. First, a mild neurosis about it, then a full-fledged psychosis, then threatened insanity. What would you do as a psychiatrist if faced with such a problem?
Hingston thought. Well, I think I'd rearrange the civilization on Mars so it resembled Earth more and more each day. If there was any way of reproducing every plant, every road, every lake, and even every ocean, I would do so. Then I would, by some vast crowd hypnosis, theoretically anyway, convince everyone in a town this size that it really was Earth, not Mars at all.
Good enough, Hingston. I think we're on the right track now. That woman in that house back there just thinks she's living on Earth. It protects her sanity. She and all the others in this town are the patients of the greatest experiment in migration and hypnosis you will ever lay your eyes on in your life. That's it, sir,
Cried Lustig.
Well,
The captain sighed.
now we're getting somewhere. I feel better. It all sounds a bit more logical now. This talk about time and going back and forth, traveling in time, turns my stomach upside down. But this way,
He actually smiled for the first time in a month.
well, it looks as if we'll be fairly welcome here. Or will we, sir?
Cried Lustig.
After all, like the pilgrims, these people came here to escape Earth. Maybe they weren't too happy to see us, sir. Maybe they'll try to drive us out or kill us. We have superior weapons if that should happen. Anyway, all we can do is try. The next house is up. Up we go.
But they had hardly crossed the lawn when Lustig stopped and looked off across the town, down the quiet, dreaming afternoon street.
Sir,
He said.
what is it, Lustig?
Said the captain.
Oh, sir, what I do see now before me. Oh,
Said Lustig, and he began to cry. His fingers came up, twisting and trembling. His face was all wonder and joy and incredulity. He sounded as if any moment he might quite go insane with unhappiness. He looked down the street, and he began to run, stumbling awkwardly, falling, picking himself up, and running on.
oh, God, thank you, God. Oh, thank you. Don't let him get away.
The captain broke into a run. Now Lustig was running at full speed, shouting. He turned into a yard halfway down the little shady side street, and leaped up upon the porch of a large green house with an iron rooster on the roof. He was beating upon the door and shouting and hollering and crying when Hingston and the captain ran up and stood in the yard. The door opened. Lustig yanked the screen wide open and in a high wail of discovery and happiness cried out,
Grandma, Grandma.
2 old people stood in the doorway, their faces lighting up. Albert! Their faces piped, and they rushed out to embrace and pat him on the back and move around him. Albert! Oh, Albert! It's been so many years! How have you grown, boy? How you are, boy? Oh, Albert, boy, how are you? Grandma, Grandpa, sobbed Albert Lustig. Good to see you. You look fine, fine. Oh, fine. He held them, turned them, kissed them, hugged them, cried on them, held them out again, blinked at the little old people. The sun was in the sky, the wind blew and the grass was green, and the screen door stood open. Come in, lad, come in. There's lemonade for you, fresh, lots of it. Grandma, Grandpa, good to see you. I've got friends down here. Here. Lustig turned and waved wildly at the captain and Hingston, who, all during the adventure on the porch, had stood in the shade of a tree, holding on to each other.
Captain, come on up. I want you to meet my grandfolks.
Howdy, said the folks. Any friend of Albert's is a friend of ours, too. Don't just stand there with your mouths open. Come on. In the living room of the old house, it was cool, and a grandfather clock ticked high and long and bronzed in one corner. There were soft pillows on large couches, and walls filled with books, and a rug cut in thick rose pattern, and antimacassars pinned to furniture, and lemonade in one hand, sweating and cool on the thirsty tongue. Here's to our health. Grandma tipped her glass to her porcelain teeth.
How long have you been here, Grandma?
Said Lustig. Oh, a good many years, she said tartly, ever since we died.
Ever since you what?
Said Captain John Black, putting his drink down.
Oh, yes,
Lustig looked at his captain.
They've been dead 30 years. And you sit there calmly?
Cried the captain. Tush, said the old woman, and winked glitteringly at John Black. Who are we to question what happens? Here we are. What's life anyway? Who does what, for why and where? All we know is here we are alive again and no questions asked. A second chance. She toddled over and held out her thin wrist to Captain John Black. Feel, he felt. Solid, ain't I? She asked. He nodded. You hear my voice, don't you? She inquired. Yes, he did. Well then, she said in triumph, why go around questioning?
Well, said the captain, it's simply that we never thought we'd find a thing like this on Mars.
And now you've found it. I dare say there's lots on every planet that'll show you God's infinite ways. Is this heaven? Nonsense, no, it's a world, and we get a second chance. Nobody told us why, but here nobody told us why we were on Earth either. That other Earth, I mean, the one that you came from. How do we know there wasn't another before that one?
A good question, said the captain.
The captain stood up and slapped his hand on his leg in an offhand fashion.
We've got to be going. It's been nice. Thank you for the drinks.
He stopped. He turned and looked toward the door, startled. Far away, in the sunlight, there was a sound of voices, a crowd, a shouting, and a great hello. What's that? Asked Hingston.
We'll soon find out.
And Captain John Black was out the front door abruptly, jolting across the green lawn and into the street of the Martian town. He stood looking at the ship. The ports were open, and his crew were streaming out, waving their hands. A crowd of people had gathered, and in and through and among these people the members of the crew were running, talking, laughing, shaking hands. People did little dances. People swarmed. The rocket lay empty and abandoned. A brass band exploded in the sunlight, flinging off a gay tune from upraised tubas and trumpets. There was a bang of drums and a shrill of fifes. Little girls with golden hair jumped up and down. Little boys shouted, "Hooray!" And fat men passed around 10-cent cigars. The mayor of the town made a speech, and each member of the crew, with a mother on one arm and a father or sister on the other, was spirited off down the street into little cottages or big mansions, and doors slammed shut. The wind rose in the clear spring sky, and all was silent. The brass band had banged off around a corner, leaving the rocket to shine and dazzle alone in the sunlight.
Abandon, cried the captain. Abandon the ship. They all did. I'll have their skins. By God, they had orders. Sir, said Lustig, don't be too hard on them. Those were all old relatives and friends. That's no excuse. Think how they felt, Captain, seeing familiar faces outside the ship. I would have obeyed orders. I would have.
The captain's mouth remained open. Striding along the sidewalk under the Martian sun, tall, smiling, eyes blue, face tan, came a young man of some 26 years. "John!" the man cried and broke into a run.
What?
Said Captain John Black. He swayed. "John, you old bugger, you!" The old man ran up and gripped his hand and slapped him on the back.
It's you.
"Of course. Who'd you think it was?"
Edward.
The captain appealed now to Lustig and Hingston, holding the stranger's hand.
This is my brother, Edward. Ed, meet my men, Lustig, Hingston, my brother.
They tugged at each other's hands and arms and finally embraced.
Ed.
"John, you old bum, you."
You're looking fine, Ed. But, Ed, what is this? You haven't changed over the years. You died, I remember, when you were 26 and I was 19. Oh, God, so many years ago, and here you are. And, Lord, what goes on? What goes on?
Edward Black gave him a brotherly knock on the chin. "Mom's waiting," he said.
Mom.
"And Dad, too."
And Dad?
The captain almost fell to earth, as if hit upon the chest with the mighty weapon. He walked stiffly and awkwardly out of coordination. He shuddered and whispered and talked only one or two words at a time.
Mom alive? Dad? Where?
"At the old house on Oak Knoll Avenue."
The old house,
said the captain in delighted amazement.
Did you hear that, Lustig, Hingston?
"I know it's hard for you to believe."
But alive, real.
"Don't I feel real?" The strong arm, firm grip, the white smile, the light curling hair. Hingston was gone. He had seen his own house down the street and was running for it. Lustig was grinning.
Now you understand, sir, what happened to everybody on the ship. They couldn't help themselves. Yes,
said the captain, eyes shut.
Yes.
He put out his hand.
When I open my eyes, you'll be gone.
He opened his eyes.
You're still here. God, Edward, you look fine.
"Come along, lunch is waiting for you. I told Mom." Lustig said,
Sir, I'll be with my grandfolks if you want me. What? Oh, fine, Lustig. Later then.
Edward grabbed his arm and marched him. "You need support."
I do. My knees all funny, my stomach loose. God.
"There's the house, remember it?"
Remember it? Hell, I can beat you to the front porch.
They ran. The wind roared over Captain John Black's ears. The earth roared under his feet. He saw the golden figure of Edward Black pull ahead of him in the amazing dream of reality. He saw the house rush forward, the door open, the screen swing back. "Beat you!" cried Edward, bounding up the steps.
I'm an old man,
Panted the captain.
and you're still young. But then you always beat me, I remember.
In the doorway, Mom, pink and plump and bright, and beside her, pepper gray, Dad with his pipe in his hand.
Mom, Dad.
He ran up the steps like a child to meet them. It was a fine, long afternoon. They finished lunch, and they sat in the living room, and he told them all about his rocket and his being captain, and they nodded and smiled upon him, and Mother was just the same, and Dad bit the end off a cigar and lighted it in his old fashion. Mom brought in some iced tea in the middle of the afternoon. Then, when there was a big turkey dinner at night and the time flowing on, when the drumsticks were sucked clean and lay brittle upon the plates, the captain leaned back in his chair and exhaled his deep contentment. Dad poured him a small glass of dry sherry. It was 7:30 in the evening. Night was in all the trees and coloring the sky, and the lamps were halos of dim light in the gentle house. From all the other houses down the street came sounds of music, pianos playing, and laughter. Mom put a record on the Victrola, and she said and Captain John Black had a dance. She was wearing the same perfume he remembered from the summer when she and Dad had been killed in the train accident. She was very real in his arms, and they danced lightly to the music.
"I'll awake in the morning," said the captain, "and I'll be in my rocket in space. All this will be gone."
No, I don't think that, she cried, softly pleading. We're here. Don't question. God is good to us. Let's be happy. The record ended with a circular hissing.
"You're tired, son,"
said Dad. He waved his pipe.
"You and Ed go upstairs. Your old bedroom is waiting for you. The old one. The brass bed and all."
The brass bed and all, laughed Edward.
"But I should report my men in."
Why? Mother was logical.
"Why? Well, I don't know. No reason, I guess. No, none at all. What's the difference?"
He shook his head.
"I'm not being very logical these days."
Good night, son. She kissed his cheek.
"Night, Mom." "Sleep tight, son."
Dad shook his hand.
"Same to you, Pop."
It's good to have you home.
"It's good to be home."
He left the land of cigar smoke and perfume and books and gentle light and descended the stairs, talking with Edward. Edward pushed a door open, and there was the yellow brass bed and the old semaphore banners from college days and a very musty raccoon coat which he petted with strange, muted affection.
"It's too much," he said faintly. "It's like being in a thunder shower without an umbrella. I'm soaked to the skin with emotion. I'm numb. I'm tired."
A night's sleep between cool, clean sheets for you, my pucko. Edward slapped the wide, snowy linens and flounced the pillows. Then he put up a window, and let the night blooming jasmine float in. There was moonlight and the sound of distant dancing and whispering.
"So this is Mars,"
said the captain, undressing. So this is Mars. Edward undressed in idle, leisurely moves, drawing his shirt off over his head, revealing golden shoulders and a good muscular neck. The lights were out. They were into bed, side by side, as in the days so many decades ago. Captain lolled and was nourished by the night wind pushing the lace curtain out upon the dark room air. Among the trees, upon a lawn, someone had cranked up a portable phonograph, and now it was playing softly, "I'll be loving you always, always with a love that's true, always." The thought of Anna came to his mind.
"Is Anna here?"
His brother, lying straight out in the moonlight from the window, waited and then said, "Yes, she's out of town, but she'll be here in the morning." The captain shut his eyes.
"I want to see Anna very much."
The room was square and quiet except for their breathing.
"Good night, Ed."
A pause. "Good night, John." He lay peacefully, letting his thoughts float. For the first time the stress of the day was moved aside, and all the excitement was calmed. He could think logically now. It had all been emotion. The bands playing, the sight of familiar faces, the sick pounding of your heart. But now, how? He thought. How was this all made, and why? For what purpose? Out of the goodness of some kind God? Was God, then, really that fine and thoughtful of his children? How and why and what for? He thought of the various theories advanced in the first heat of the afternoon by Hingston and Lustig. He let all kinds of new theories drop in lazy pebbles down through his mind, as through dark water now, turning, throwing out dull flashes of white light. Mars, Earth, Mom, Dad, Edward, Mars, Martians. Who had lived here 1,000 years ago on Mars? Martians? Or had this always been like this? Martians. He repeated the word quietly, inwardly. He laughed out loud almost. He had the most ridiculous theory, all of a sudden. It gave him a kind of chilled feeling. It was really nothing to think of course. Highly improbable. Silly. Forget it. Ridiculous. But he thought, just suppose now, that there were Martians living on Mars, and they saw our ship coming here, and saw us inside, our ship, and hated us. Suppose now, just for the hell of it, that they wanted to destroy us as invaders, as unwanted ones, and they wanted to do it in a very clever way so that we would be taken off guard. Well, what would the best weapon that a Martian could use against Earthmen with atom weapons? The answer was interesting. Telepathy, hypnosis, memory and imagination. Suppose all these houses weren't real at all. This bed, not real, but only figments of my own imagination given substance by telepathy and hypnosis by the Martians. Suppose these houses are really some other shape, a Martian shape, but by playing on my desires and wants, these Martians have made this seem like my old hometown, my old house, to lull me out of my suspicions. And what better way to fool a man by his own emotions? And suppose those two people in the next room asleep are not my mother and father at all, but two Martians, incredibly brilliant, with the ability to keep me under this dreaming hypnosis all the time. And that brass band today, what a clever plan it would be. First, fool Lustig, then fool Hingston, then gather a crowd around the rocket ship and wave. And all the men in the ship, seeing mothers, aunts, uncles, sweethearts dead 10, 20 years ago, naturally, disregarding orders, would rush out and abandon the ship. What more natural? What more unsuspecting? What more simple? A man doesn't ask too many questions when his mother is suddenly brought back to life. He's much too happy. And the brass band played, and everybody was taken off to private homes. And here we all are, tonight, in various houses and various beds, with no weapons to protect us, and the rocket lies in the moonlight, empty. And wouldn't it be horrible and terrifying to discover that all of this was some part of some clever plan by Martians to divide and conquer us and kill us? Sometime during the night, perhaps, my brother here on this bed will change form, melt, shift, and become a one-eyed green and yellow-toothed Martian. It would be very simple for him just to turn over in bed and put a knife into my heart. And all those other houses down the street, a dozen other brothers or fathers suddenly melting away, taking out knives and doing things to unsuspecting sleeping men of Earth. His hands were shaking under the covers. His body was cold. Suddenly it was not a theory. Suddenly he was very afraid. He lifted himself in bed and listened. The night was very quiet. The music had stopped. The wind had died. His brother lay sleeping next beside him. Very carefully he lifted the sheets, rolled them back. He slipped from bed and was walking softly across the room when his brother's voice said, "Where are you going?"
What?
His brother's voice was quite cold. "I said, where do you think you're going?"
For a drink of water.
"But you're not thirsty."
Yes, I am.
"No, you're not." Captain John Black broke and ran across the room. He screamed. He screamed twice. He never reached the door. In the morning, the brass band played a mournful dirge. From every house in the street came solemn little processions bearing long boxes, and along the sun-filled street, weeping and changing, came the grandmas and the grandfathers and the mothers and sisters and brothers, walking to the churchyard, where there were open holes dug freshly and new tombstones installed. 17 holes in all, and 17 tombstones. 3 of the tombstones said Captain John Black, Albert Lustig, and Samuel Hingston. The mayor made a sad little speech, his face sometimes looking like the mayor, sometimes looking like something else. Mother and Father Black were there, with Brother Edward, and they cried, their faces melting now from a familiar face into something else. Grandma and Grandpa Lustig were there, weeping, their faces also shifting like wax, shivering as a thing does in waves of heat on a summer day. The coffins were lowered. Somebody murmured about the unexpected and sudden deaths of 17 fine men during the night. Earth was shoveled in on the coffin tops. After the funeral, the brass band slammed and banged back into town, and the crowd stood round and waved and shouted as the rocket was torn to pieces and strewn about and blown up. And that was the end of Mars in Heaven by Ray Bradbury, first published 1948.